have any of you felt left behind this year? I mean, just think about it. Have any of you been left behind? Well, if you have, this has been your year. I mean, this has really been your year, because if you just look at the American elections, 63 million people voted for Donald Trump. Now, that's a whole lot of people, a huge amount of people in Donald Trump's words. And we're told they voted so because they felt left behind. That's a clear vote of disenchantment with the American system, with the American democracy. Now, let's look at the Brexit vote in the UK, the vote that was all about the UK leaving the EU. 17.5 million people voted for Brexit. And they also were disenchanted with the system. That's a clear vote of kind of a feeling of being left behind. Now I ask you, I mean, is that the end of what we're seeing with people being left behind? Well, who knows? I mean, we have the March elections in the Netherlands coming in front of us with Geert Wilders from the Freedom Party, who's a clear anti-politics person. We have Marine Le Pen in April, standing for elections in France, with her, at least some polls are telling us, going up. So it's still left to see. But indeed, I mean, this year has been a very interesting year, and a lot of us have come to ask, well, is this a sign of American democracy, European democracies, or Western democracies failing us? And indeed, that's a big question. And the question is, well, how can we measure that? What is the real indicator of if our governance and governmental systems are failing? And one way to measure government in general, the efficacy of government, how well government is doing, is how much is government spending on us? How much is public money going out of the finance into making our lives better? And indeed, if we look at the OECD data from the recent 2 decades, then we see that public spending has definitely gone up. I mean, if you look at the US, from 37% to 38.7% of the general GDP is public spending. If you look at financially ridden Spain, then you see going up from 43 to 47% of GDP. So indeed, public spending has gone up, but the big question, has that spending actually reached its goal? Is it getting to us, the people? And indeed, it hasn't in many areas, and we should start looking probably at the areas. And the first area I'd like to look at with you is community housing and amenities. And when we look at housing and amenities, we see a decline of 0.7% in GDP allocations to those very important purposes. And then if we look at education, for example, what do we see? We see yet again 0.7% reduction in GDP allocations for education. So actually, public spending in education has fallen. And in some countries, we're amazed to learn that tuition levels, for example, for BA, bachelor's degree, tertiary education, has risen, and even significantly. If you look at the UK, for example, setting its first tuition fees in 1998, well, until 2012, almost risen by tenfold. So reached the almost £9,000 mark in 2012, and that caused quite severe riots in the UK and a lot of students being unhappy about that. If we look at public spending on health, well, what do we see there? Does it look better? Well, in health, in the last 2 decades, in OECD countries, meaning developing countries, indeed we've seen a substantial augmentation in government spending on health. We're getting older, people are living longer. But does that mean that money is really getting to us? Are we feeling the improvement in our health? Well, the point is here that although public spending has risen, private spending has risen even faster. So it means that actually we're taking out more dollars from our pockets to put into our health. So for example, if you look at the UK again, which has the oldest public health system in the world, then you see that within those 2 decades, private spending on health has risen by 70%. 70%, that's a whole lot of pounds. So that's probably, why people are sensing that the benefits are not really reaching directly at them. And then what's happening to public trust? Public trust in government is a really important factor because government policies, government regulations depend on our trust. And we need trust in order for people to comply with regulations, in order for people to comply with government policies, in order for people to pay taxes. And what we've seen is a lot of interesting indicators that have shown that consistently trust in government is deteriorating. So one of those indicators is the Pew Research Center data for 2016, which actually tried to look at public trust since the 60s. So if you look from Kennedy administrations, Johnson administrations in the 60s, we had about 70% trust of people in government. 70% of people trusted in their administration. But then if you look at Barack Obama's administration, his last year in 2016, trust has plummeted. 20% only of people in the US actually trusted government. So that's not a whole lot of people. And then you could look at something like the Edelman Trust Barometer. The barometer has been surveying trust levels in 28 countries since 2012. And that trust barometer, when it was published in 2017, actually revealed to us that 20 out of 28 of those countries, people there lacked trust in government. So that's quite a blow to governments in those countries. And then if you look at a Gallup poll from 2015 about trust in OECD countries, only 40% on average of the public in those countries trust government. So trust is indeed deteriorating, but is it deteriorating because government has failed us? Is government in such a miserable state indeed? So how to measure what has been achieved by government? Well, first of all, our changing societies are increasingly global societies, interconnected societies. They create all of those kind of complex and sticky problems that are really difficult to solve. So that's probably one of the reasons, potentially one of the reasons, why some of us feel that it's so difficult. So just take a problem of transportation. In Tel Aviv, in Hong Kong, or in London, those are really complex problems that you need a lot of different solutions put together in order to solve those problems. Another issue that always comes up is, well, in this modern society, bureaucracy needs so much knowledge, so much know-how and capacity, and doesn't always have that capacity, right? So, that's been another problem that we're seeing. And, well, we have technologies. Most of us just hold it in our hand most of the day, right? So technology and communications is so widespread, but still, if you look at infrastructure, for example, how far has technology actually infiltrated into infrastructure or just public bureaucracies in general? Not that quickly, has it? So in corporations, let's look at corporations. We've learned and we know that corporations are very central to our societies, very central in our economies. But it's interesting to learn how strong corporations have become in the last 2-3 decades. And indeed, from an index just published last year by TNI, 37 out of 100 of the world's largest economies are corporations. So if you look at corporations like BP, like Exxon, like Volkswagen, all of their revenues are larger than the GDP of many developed countries, like Hungary, like Finland, like Greece or Portugal. So you have these huge corporations, and the corporations, well, the stronger they get, they have their interests, and obviously with those interests at hand, they capture a lot of politicians. They kind of beg their interests come into the door, and that capture causes corruption, obviously, and that's another reason for our failing democracies. But probably the most serious problem we have at hand is the fact that we've lost interest in the problem. So many of us just don't really care anymore about what happens in government. We just, we'll leave it to the politicians to deal with that. And that's a serious problem. So how can we measure that? Can we measure interest in government? Well, one way to measure interest in government is voter turnout. And if you look at voter turnout in the past 3 decades, then voter turnout on average in many countries has consistently gone down. Now, it's difficult to monitor because voter turnout fluctuates between election cycles, between years. But in general, there is this trend of decline in voter turnout, and that's a definite indicator of the fact that we are showing less interest in our politics. Now, the big question, seriously, when you think about it, the big question is what can be done, right? So what can we do to make the future of government look a bit different? Well, I would suggest just 4 simple steps, very easy. So first one is let's get more people involved, right? If our problem is the disinterest in government, we have to get more people involved in interesting ways in the acts of government. So take, for example, participatory budgeting. Have any of you heard of that? Well, that happens to be just the thing. Participatory budgeting has been practiced in places like Porto Alegre, Brazil. And if it can happen there, it can probably happen elsewhere. Meaning that people take part in the way that local government or regional government or even central government decide to allocate funding to different areas, to different projects. And in that way, they get involved. And indeed, when research has tried to follow that through and see how that impacts people's trust in government, we will see a rise of trust when people are actually participating in allocating the funding. Now, another way could be wiki-like projects where we write laws together. Wouldn't that be a great idea? And that has happened in some cases. And also just getting more network of people, both laymen and experts, to be involved in policy making. So that can definitely happen. The second step is let's put technology to the test. So we hear about technology so much, but technology in government is less pervasive. But some places have really made leaps and bounds. And one place I want to give you as an example is Patna, India. Now that wouldn't seem like a likely place. Patna is considered among the dirtiest metropolises in India, but it's developed an app that allows citizens to notify the local government of any nuisances or problems or violations of different regulations like littering, for example. And people in Patna have done that, and then the littering squads of government or the anti-litter squads of government go in and try to take care of the problem, and all of that is monitored through the app, and people then get notified about how that's been doing. So that's a good example of using technology into changing people's both involvement and behaviors with government. Another example is the use of the Internet of Things. We could make our cities smarter. So have you heard of things like trash cans giving notices to the local municipality that they're full, or pipes notifying government that we're leaking and please take care of us? So those things are already happening, and both smart cars and networks of solar panels across cities are happening as well, and that, of course, should be augmented. Third, let's focus on the local. So Elinor Ostrom, Nobel laureate prize, had already taught us that a lot of very globally oriented problems can actually be better focused on or better adapted at the local level. And we do see that with climate change, for example. If you look at recent activity on climate change with the Alliance of Cities on Climate and Energy, 7,100 cities have joined the alliance, and they've been taking on even stronger commitments to reduce carbon and their carbon footprint than the countries that those cities belong to. So local activity, it's really important. And lastly, let's take our global communication networks to explore what works. So we have our global networks at hand, and although we have to do a lot locally, still we can use that to learn. And all it requires is just opening our minds. So look at TED. Open your mind. Thank you.